Ethan Brooks left behind his wife, Lily, and their children for a younger woman, convinced he had everything he'd ever wanted. But as his success spirals into scandal, he's haunted by Lily's final words. Little did he know, his ex-wife held the key to his downfall, and she wasn't done yet. The glitter of the city's skyline spilled through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Ethan Brooks' penthouse. The space was a symphony of sleek luxury. Black leather couches, glass-topped tables, and towering shelves displaying rare bottles of whiskey and wine. But tonight, the centerpiece of his indulgence was the crystal flute in his hand, filled with vintage champagne. Ethan swirled it lazily, leaning back into the plush cushions, savoring the warmth that radiated through his chest. Freedom had a taste. He could feel it in every sip. Tonight wasn't just about closing a business deal or cashing another check. No, tonight was personal. He was celebrating the official end of his marriage to Lily Harper. The divorce papers, signed and stamped, lay folded on the table next to him, a monument to his victory. He was free from the monotony, the obligations, and the woman who had faded into the background of his life. Ethan took another sip, his gaze drifting to the view of the bustling city below. His phone vibrated on the coffee table, but he ignored it. He had everything he needed right here. The soft hum of jazz played in the background, and the scent of Sophia's perfume lingered faintly in the air, a reminder of the passionate night they'd shared just hours ago. His lips curled into a smirk as he thought of her, young, wild, and glamorous. She was everything Lily had stopped being years ago. Lily. The name still carried weight, though he didn't like to admit it. He closed his eyes, recalling the final meeting with their lawyers that morning. Lily had sat across the table, her hands clasped tightly together, her knuckles pale. But she hadn't cried. She hadn't begged him to reconsider. Instead, she had signed the papers with a calm, almost eerie composure. Her voice had been steady, but her eyes betrayed something deeper. "I hope you know what you're doing, Ethan," she had said, sliding the documents toward him. He had laughed it off then, brushing it aside as the last desperate plea of a woman who couldn't accept defeat. But now, sitting alone in the dim glow of his penthouse, her words replayed in his mind. A small, nagging sensation stirred in his gut, one he quickly silenced by downing the rest of his champagne and pouring another glass. As the night stretched on, he allowed himself to indulge in the fantasy of Lily's new life, a life without him. He imagined her in a cramped apartment with peeling wallpaper, struggling to pay rent. Maybe she would work part-time at some dreary office or a retail store, far removed from the luxurious lifestyle she once enjoyed. The thought gave him a twisted sense of satisfaction. She had been too dependent on him for too long, and now she'd finally learned what it meant to fend for herself. He leaned back further, closing his eyes as memories of their marriage flickered through his mind. Lily had once been vibrant, full of dreams and ambition. But somewhere along the way, she had become predictable, content with being a stay-at-home mom, managing the household while he chased success. She had stopped challenging him, stopped exciting him, and in his eyes, that made her disposable. Just as he was about to drift into a champagne-induced daze, his phone vibrated again. This time, he picked it up, annoyed at the interruption. It was a text from Sophia. "Miss me already?" He chuckled, typing back a playful response before setting the phone down. Sophia was fun, but she wasn't the type to ask too many questions. That's what he liked about her. No strings, no guilt, just pleasure. Still, as much as he tried to push Lily out of his mind, he couldn't shake the image of her from that morning. Her steady gaze, her calm demeanor, and the faint tremble in her fingers as she signed the papers. She hadn't looked defeated. If anything, she had looked prepared. Ethan shrugged off the thought and stood, stretching his arms above his head. He had no reason to worry. Lily was nothing without him. He had the money, the power, and the connections. Whatever she was planning, if she was planning anything at all, wouldn't matter. He had moved on, and she would have to do the same. Across town, in a small apartment that smelled faintly of cardboard and rain, Lily Harper sat on the edge of a worn-out couch, her fingers tracing the fabric absent-mindedly. The apartment was nothing like the mansion she had once called home. The walls were bare, the furniture minimal, and the sound of traffic hummed through the thin walls. But despite its modest appearance, it was hers, a space untouched by Ethan's presence. Olivia had already gone to bed, her soft breathing drifting from the bedroom down the hall. Lily stared at the flickering light of the television, though she wasn't watching it. A half-eaten bowl of soup sat on the coffee table, the spoon abandoned. She had tried to eat, but her appetite had vanished hours ago. The weight of the day pressed down on her like a heavy blanket. The finality of the divorce, the sting of Ethan's indifference, and the uncertainty of her future all collided in her mind. But it wasn't the loss of luxury that hurt the most. It was the humiliation. Ethan had discarded her like an old piece of furniture, trading her in for someone younger and more exciting. Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them back, refusing to let them fall. She had cried enough in the weeks leading up to this moment. Now, there was no room for tears, only determination. The sound of small footsteps pulled her from her thoughts. Olivia appeared in the doorway, her eyes still heavy with sleep. "Mom," she whispered, padding over to the couch and climbing into Lily's lap. "Are you okay?" Lily wrapped her arms around her daughter, her fingers gently stroking Olivia's hair. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just thinking. Is it about Dad?" Olivia asked, her voice innocent but piercing. Lily hesitated, then nodded. "A little bit." Olivia rested her head on her mother's shoulder, her small hand clutching Lily's arm. "We're going to be okay, right?" Lily's throat tightened, but she managed to smile. "Yes, we are. It's going to be different, but we'll be okay." As Olivia drifted back to sleep in her arms, Lily stared out the window, watching the city lights blur against the rain-soaked glass. Her heart ached, but beneath the pain was something stronger, resolve. Ethan thought he had one. He thought she would disappear quietly, fading into obscurity while he enjoyed his new life. But he was wrong. Lily wasn't done yet. She didn't know exactly how she would do it, but one thing was certain. She wouldn't let him get away with what he'd done. The man who had built his reputation on lies and betrayal was about to learn what it felt like to lose everything. She kissed Olivia's forehead and carried her back to bed, tucking her in gently. As she closed the bedroom door, she allowed herself one final thought before turning off the lights. This wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. If you were in Lily's shoes, how would you fight back after losing everything? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel so you can follow her journey to the end. You won't want to miss what happens next. The gray morning light slipped through the curtains of Lily Harper's small apartment, casting long shadows across the boxes still stacked against the walls. The air smelled faintly of last night's rain, and the sound of honking cars echoed through the street below. For a moment, as Lily blinked awake, she forgot where she was. The bed felt too hard, the air too cold, and the weight on her chest too heavy. Then, reality came crashing down. She sat up, raking her fingers through her tangled hair. The apartment was silent except for the rhythmic ticking of the clock on the kitchen wall. Olivia and Noah were still asleep, their soft breathing a reminder of the responsibility resting squarely on her shoulders. She couldn't afford to crumble, not now, not ever. Lily swung her legs over the side of the bed and padded barefoot to the bathroom. She splashed cold water on her face, wiping away the remnants of last night's tears. Her reflection stared back at her, tired and worn, but determined. She didn't recognize the woman in the mirror. This wasn't the Lily who once hosted charity events and mingled with society's elite. This was someone raw, stripped of pretense, and forced to start over from scratch. She dried her face, tied her hair into a messy bun, and made her way to the kitchen. The coffee maker hummed softly as she leaned against the counter, cradling a steaming mug in her hands. Bills were scattered across the table, their due dates looming like storm clouds. The divorce settlement had left her with just enough to survive for a few months, but the mansion, the investments, even the vacation home she had adored, all of it was gone. Ethan had fought her at every turn, ensuring that she walked away with the bare minimum. The anger simmered beneath her skin, but she buried it. There was no time for anger when there were bills to pay and children to feed. A small yawn broke the silence. Lily turned to see Olivia standing in the doorway, her hair a messy tangle and her eyes half closed. The sight made Lily's heart ache. Olivia was only 12, but the divorce had forced her to grow up too quickly. She shuffled over to the table and climbed into a chair, propping her chin on her hands. "Morning, sweetheart," Lily said softly, setting a bowl of cereal in front of her. "Did you sleep okay?" Olivia shrugged, stirring the cereal absent-mindedly. "I guess. I had a weird dream, though." "About what?" "Dad," Olivia murmured, not meeting her mother's eyes. "I dreamed he came back, and we were all living in the old house again." Lily swallowed hard, her fingers tightening around the coffee mug. "Dreams can be tricky, can't they?" Olivia nodded, her gaze distant. "Do you miss him?" The question hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Lily forced herself to take a breath before answering. "Sometimes. But I miss who he used to be, not who he became." Olivia seemed to consider this, her spoon swirling lazily in the bowl. "Do you think he misses us?" "I don't know," Lily admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "But no matter what, we have each other. And that's what matters." Olivia offered a small, hesitant smile, and Lily leaned over to kiss the top of her head. "Now hurry up and eat, or you'll be late for school." After Olivia finished breakfast and left for the bus stop, Lily sat alone at the table, staring at the pile of bills. Rent was due in 2 weeks, and the electricity bill wasn't far behind. She had applied to every job she could find, administrative positions, retail, even waitressing. But the gaps in her employment history as a stay-at-home mom worked against her. Every rejection email was another blow to her dwindling sense of self-worth. Desperation gnawed at her, but she couldn't let her children see it. They needed stability, and she would give it to them, even if it meant taking the smallest job available. She grabbed her laptop and opened a job listing website, scrolling through positions she had seen a dozen times before. Her heart sank as she clicked through descriptions that required skills she hadn't used in years. Just as she was about to give up, her phone buzzed on the counter. It was Jason Bennett. "Lily." His familiar voice came through the line, warm and reassuring. "I've been thinking about your situation. There might be something I can help you with." Lily exhaled, relieved just to hear a friendly voice. "Jason, I don't know if I can handle another dead end." "This isn't a dead end," he assured her. "It's a start. My friend owns a small bakery downtown. They're looking for someone to help with catering and managing the books. I know it's not glamorous, but it could buy you some time." A bakery. It wasn't exactly the corporate job she had once imagined, but right now, anything was better than staring at rejection emails. "I'll take it," she said without hesitation. "Great. I'll set up a meeting for you tomorrow," Jason replied. "You've got this, Lily." After hanging up, Lily allowed herself a moment of hope. It wasn't much, but it was a step in the right direction. She could make this work. She had to. The next morning, she dressed in her best business casual outfit and headed downtown. The bakery was a cozy little place with large windows and the smell of freshly baked bread wafting from the kitchen. Maria, the owner, greeted her warmly and led her to a small table by the window. As Maria looked over her thin resume, Lily tried to push down the nerves twisting her stomach. "I see you've been out of the workforce for a while," Maria said, glancing up. "Yes," Lily admitted. "I was a stay-at-home mom for most of my marriage, but I'm organized, dependable, and willing to learn." Maria smiled gently. "You remind me of myself when I started this place. I had no formal experience, but I had determination. And sometimes that's more important." After a few more questions, Maria stood and extended her hand. "I like you, Lily. I think you'll do well here. Can you start tomorrow?" Relief washed over her, and she shook Maria's hand firmly. "Yes, thank you." That evening, Lily shared the news with Olivia and Noah over dinner. Olivia's face lit up, and Noah clapped his hands excitedly. "Does this mean we can get more ice cream now?" he asked, grinning. Lily laughed, the sound genuine for the first time in weeks. "We'll see." Later that night, as the kids slept, Lily sat at the kitchen table with a notebook in front of her. She listed every expense, every payment due, and calculated how much she would need to make ends meet. It wasn't much, but it was a start. She glanced at the old notebook she had found while unpacking, a notebook filled with Ethan's scribbled financial notes. Most of it was incomprehensible to her, but certain phrases stood out. Offshore accounts, shadow investments, shell companies. She ran her fingers over the pages, a thought forming in the back of her mind. She didn't need to know everything right now. All she needed was time. Time to figure out how to use this information to her advantage. For the first time in a long while, Lily felt like she had a plan. She closed the notebook, turned off the kitchen light, and headed to bed. Tomorrow was a new day, and she was ready for it. Ethan Brooks sat at the head of the long mahogany conference table, fingers drumming rhythmically against the polished wood. The floor-to-ceiling windows of his office overlooked the city, the view normally a symbol of his power and success. Today, however, it felt like a reminder of just how far he could fall. His CFO, Mark, flipped through a stack of financial reports, each page adding to the tension that already strangled the room. Ethan glanced at the other board members seated around the table. Their faces were expressionless, but he could sense their unease. They weren't used to seeing him like this, silent, calculating, on the defensive. Normally, he was the one commanding the room, setting the pace, making decisions with the confidence of a man who believed he was untouchable. But this meeting wasn't going as planned. Mark cleared his throat. As you can see, the quarterly earnings have taken a hit. Our revenue from the real estate sector is down by 20%, and the luxury brand's portfolio isn't performing as expected. Ethan leaned back, steepling his fingers under his chin. What about the private investments? Mark hesitated, flipping to another page. That's where things get complicated. A few of the offshore accounts haven't generated the returns we projected. Some of them, well, they're in the red. A muscle twitched in Ethan's jaw. He had built his empire on risk, leveraging investments that others wouldn't touch, but his instincts had never failed him before. And what's the board suggesting we do about this? Mark shifted uncomfortably in his seat. The board wants us to reconsider some of the acquisitions. Cut the ones that aren't yielding immediate returns. Sell them off, Ethan said flatly. Mark nodded. That would be the safest route. The word safe tasted bitter in Ethan's mouth. He had never played it safe. That was what set him apart from other businessmen. But now, he was cornered, and every move he made would be under scrutiny. He dismissed the meeting with a wave of his hand, not bothering to listen to the rest of Mark's recommendations. Once the boardroom emptied, he remained seated, staring at the skyline. The city stretched out before him, but instead of feeling invincible, he felt trapped. He had always thought of himself as the man pulling the strings, but now it seemed like someone else had the upper hand. His phone buzzed on the table. He picked it up and saw a text from Sophia. "Where are you? Thought we were meeting for lunch." He exhaled sharply and replied, "Running late. Go ahead without me." Sophia had been a welcome distraction in the beginning. Her beauty, her charm, the way she made him feel young and powerful, it had all been intoxicating. But lately, she had become more of a liability than an asset. Her spending habits were excessive, and she had no interest in the pressures he faced. She wanted luxury without the burden of responsibility. He tossed the phone aside and stood, walking over to the window. His reflection stared back at him, sharp and polished. But behind the facade, he was unraveling. The cracks in his perfect life were growing wider, and he didn't know how much longer he could hold everything together. The knock at his office door startled him. "Come in," he called, turning around. One of his assistants entered, holding a small envelope. "This was delivered for you, sir. No return address." Ethan took the envelope and dismissed the assistant. The paper was thick, expensive, and the handwriting on the front was unfamiliar. He tore it open and pulled out a single piece of paper with a short, typed message. "You're not as untouchable as you think. Watch your back." His heart pounded as he reread the words. Someone was watching him, someone who knew more than they should. He clenched the paper in his fist, his mind racing through possibilities. Was this a bluff? A competitor trying to rattle him? Or was it something more dangerous? He couldn't afford to be paranoid. But as he stared at the note, a memory crept into his mind. Lily's calm, steady gaze during their final meeting. She hadn't looked defeated. She had looked prepared. He shook his head, dismissing the thought. Lily didn't have the resources to come after him. She was barely scraping by, living off the scraps he had left her. She wasn't a threat, but the unease lingered, like an itch he couldn't scratch. That evening, he returned to the penthouse to find Sophia lounging on the couch, scrolling through her phone. She didn't look up as he entered, her attention focused on whatever photos or gossip held her interest. "Hey," he said, setting his briefcase down. "Hey," she replied, barely acknowledging him. He loosened his tie and poured himself a glass of scotch, the amber liquid burning as it slid down his throat. The silence between them was suffocating. They had once been inseparable, but now they existed in the same space without truly connecting. "Long day?" Sophia finally asked, her eyes still glued to the screen. "Something like that." She set her phone down and stretched lazily, her silk robe slipping off one shoulder. "You know what you need? A weekend away. We could go to the Bahamas or the French Riviera." "I can't," Ethan said, his tone sharper than he intended. "I have too much going on," Sophia pouted. But the gesture felt rehearsed, like a trick she'd used on other men before him. "You always have too much going on. What's the point of having all this money if we can't enjoy it?" Ethan didn't answer. He downed the rest of his scotch and poured another glass. Sophia stood, her patience apparently running thin, and walked toward the bedroom without saying goodnight. He sat in the dimly lit living room, the glow of the city casting shadows on the walls. He had everything he'd ever wanted: wealth, power, freedom, but it felt hollow. The warning note sat on the coffee table, a constant reminder that his empire wasn't as stable as he thought. As the night dragged on, Ethan's mind wandered back to Lily. He imagined her sitting in a small apartment, struggling to make ends meet. Part of him relished the idea, but another part, the part he buried under layers of arrogance, felt something else. Regret? Guilt? He couldn't tell anymore. His phone buzzed again, and he grabbed it, expecting another text from Sophia. But it wasn't. The screen displayed an anonymous message. "Check the headlines tomorrow. You'll understand." His breath hitched as he stared at the message. Someone was playing a game, and he didn't know the rules. He set the phone down and leaned back, closing his eyes. Tomorrow would bring answers, but he wasn't sure he wanted to know them. The morning sun seeped through the cheap blinds in Lily Harper's apartment, casting slivers of light onto the kitchen counter. She stood at the small sink, scrubbing a dish with more force than necessary. The scent of coffee brewing filled the cramped space, but it did little to calm her racing mind. Today was her first day at the bakery, and while it wasn't her dream job, it was the lifeline she desperately needed. She glanced at the clock above the stove. Just past 6:30 a.m. Olivia and Noah were still asleep, the soft hum of their breathing drifting from their rooms. For a moment, she considered letting herself break, letting the weight of everything she'd lost drag her down. But then, the memory of their faces, their trust, their innocence, forced her to pull herself together. Lily finished her coffee, rinsed the cup, and quickly dressed in a simple button-up shirt and jeans. Her hair, tied into a loose ponytail, framed her face as she studied herself in the mirror by the front door. This version of Lily was different from the polished woman who once attended gala events and charity dinners on Ethan's arm. This version had rough hands from scrubbing floors and tired eyes from sleepless nights. But she preferred this version. She was real now, stripped of the illusions that had once defined her life. By the time she arrived at the bakery, the smell of fresh bread and cinnamon rolls greeted her like an old friend. The small shop was warm and inviting, with wooden shelves lined with pastries and baked goods that gleamed under the morning light. Maria, the owner, was already busy kneading dough at the back counter. "Morning, Lily," Maria called over her shoulder. Her hands were dusted with flour, and a streak of it ran across her cheek. "Glad you're early. I figured I'd get a head start," Lily replied, tying on an apron. Maria chuckled. "Good. There's no such thing as too much prep in this business." The morning passed in a blur of tasks, measuring ingredients, mixing batters, and arranging trays of cookies and muffins for the display case. Lily worked quietly, her hands moving with purpose, but her mind wandered. The image of Ethan's smug face from their final meeting crept into her thoughts, along with the memory of his parting words. "You'll see how much you needed me." She shook her head, forcing herself to focus on the task at hand. But even as she wiped down the counters and refilled the coffee station, a gnawing thought remained. She didn't just want to survive. She wanted to win. Ethan had taken everything from her, but he hadn't broken her spirit. And now, with the small notebook of his financial records hidden in her dresser, she had a weapon. During her lunch break, Lily slipped outside and sat on a bench near the park. The cool autumn breeze rustled the leaves around her as she pulled out her phone and dialed Jason's number. He answered on the second ring. "Hey, Lily. How's the new job?" "It's good," she replied, though her voice betrayed her distraction. "Actually, I was hoping you could help me with something." Jason hesitated. "Sure. What do you need?" "I found some of Ethan's old financial notes," Lily said, lowering her voice as a group of joggers passed by. "A lot of it doesn't make sense to me, but there are mentions of offshore accounts and investments I didn't know about." Jason whistled softly. "That could be useful. Are you thinking what I think you're thinking?" "I want to know exactly what he's been hiding," she said, her fingers tightening around the phone. "If there's anything illegal or unethical, I want to expose it." Jason's tone grew serious. "That's a big step, Lily. If you dig into this, you need to be prepared for what you'll find, and for the fallout." "I know," she replied, her determination unwavering. "But I'm tired of being the one who lost everything while he gets to walk away unscathed." Jason was quiet for a moment before he spoke again. "I have a friend who's a forensic accountant. If you send me the notes, I'll pass them along. He can look for anything suspicious." Lily exhaled, relief washing over her. "Thank you, Jason. I don't know what I'd do without you." "You'd still figure it out," he said with a chuckle. "You've always been stronger than you realize." After ending the call, Lily leaned back against the bench, closing her eyes as the wind brushed against her face. For the first time in weeks, she felt like she was gaining control. It wasn't much, but it was a start. When her shift ended that afternoon, she picked up Olivia and Noah from school and brought them to the small park near their apartment. The children laughed as they raced each other to the swings, their joy infectious. Lily sat on a bench, watching them with a soft smile. These moments reminded her of why she was fighting so hard. It wasn't just about revenge. It was about building a future for her children. "Mom," Olivia called, running over with her cheeks flushed from the cold. "Can we get hot chocolate after this?" "Of course," Lily replied, wrapping her arms around her daughter in a playful hug. "But only if you promise to finish your homework tonight." "I promise." Olivia giggled before running back to join Noah on the slide. Lily's phone buzzed in her pocket, and she pulled it out to see a message from Jason. "Got the notes? My friend's already looking into them. I'll let you know what we find." She stared at the screen for a moment before typing back, "Thank you. I'm ready for whatever comes next." That evening, after the kids were tucked into bed, Lily sat at the small kitchen table with a cup of tea in hand. The apartment was quiet, but her mind was anything but. She thought of all the nights she had spent wondering how Ethan could walk away so easily, how he could destroy their family and sleep soundly at night. Now, she finally had the chance to turn the tables. Her thoughts were interrupted by the creak of the bedroom door. Olivia peeked out, her eyes sleepy but curious. "Mom?" Lily set down her cup and motioned for her daughter to come over. "What is it, sweetheart?" Olivia climbed onto her lap, resting her head against Lily's shoulder. "Are we really going to be okay?" Lily kissed the top of her daughter's head, her voice steady. "Yes, we are. It might take some time, but I promise we'll be okay." Olivia yawned, her small body relaxing against her mother's. "I believe you." As she carried Olivia back to bed and tucked her in, Lily couldn't help but feel the weight of those words. Her daughter believed in her, and that belief was enough to keep her going. She returned to the kitchen, her resolve stronger than ever. Ethan had underestimated her. He had seen her as someone who would fade into the background, someone who would crumble under the weight of his betrayal. But he was wrong, because Lily wasn't done fighting. And soon, Ethan Brooks would find out exactly how wrong he had been. Ethan Brooks' day began like any other, an early morning workout at his private gym, followed by a quick shower and a perfectly tailored navy blue suit waiting for him on the rack. But when he sat down in his sleek kitchen with a cup of coffee and scrolled through his emails, his heart skipped a beat. There it was, buried between meeting reminders and promotional spam. An anonymous email with a subject line that read, "Thought you might want to see this." He hesitated for a moment before clicking on it. The email contained no message, just a link to an article that hadn't been published yet. He recognized the publication immediately. It was one of the city's top financial magazines, known for its investigative pieces that often ruin careers. The headline read, "Billionaire Ethan Brooks Under Scrutiny. Hidden Offshore Accounts and Fraud Allegations Surface." His hand trembled as he clicked on the article, but the link didn't lead to a public website. It was a draft, likely sent as a warning. The contents were vague, but damning enough to raise questions about his business dealings. The reporter had pieced together just enough information to suggest corruption, but not enough to solidify the accusations. Not yet. He pushed his chair back and stood, pacing the length of his kitchen. His mind raced, analyzing every possible source of the leak. The offshore accounts were buried under layers of shell companies, nearly impossible to trace. Only a select few people had access to that information. Him, his financial advisor, and Lily, he muttered under his breath, the name leaving a bitter taste in his mouth. He had underestimated her once, but the timing of this leak couldn't be a coincidence. His phone buzzed, jolting him out of his thoughts. It was Sophia, calling for the third time that morning. He ignored it. The last thing he needed was her complaints about his neglect. If anything, she was part of the problem. She had spent the past few months bleeding his accounts dry with her extravagant lifestyle, treating his money like a bottomless well. He needed to act fast. By the time he arrived at the office, his assistant had already set up a meeting with the PR team. They crowded into the conference room, their worried faces reflecting the severity of the situation. Ethan scanned the room, taking in their nervous glances and hushed whispers. His reputation was their currency, and they could sense the storm brewing. "Damage control," Ethan barked, slamming the printed article onto the table. "I want this handled before it hits the press." One of the junior executives shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Do we know how they got the information?" "We're looking into it," Mark, his CFO, replied. "But whoever leaked it knew exactly where to dig. This wasn't random." Ethan clenched his fists under the table. He needed answers, and he needed them now. "I don't care what it takes. Buy them off, threaten legal action, whatever. Just shut them down." As the team dispersed, Mark lingered behind, his expression grim. "Ethan, there's something else you should know." "What now?" Ethan snapped, barely keeping his frustration in check. "There's been a spike in withdrawals from our offshore accounts. Someone's moving the money." Ethan's jaw tightened. "How much?" "Enough to raise red flags. If we don't stop it, the authorities will start digging." He didn't need Mark to spell out the consequences. His entire empire could collapse if the truth came out. But the question remained, who was behind this? When he returned to his office, he shut the door and dialed Sophia's number. She picked up on the second ring, her tone playful. "Finally. I thought you were ignoring me." "I don't have time for games, Sophia," Ethan growled. "Did you tell anyone about my accounts?" There was a brief pause, and he could almost hear her mind racing. "What are you talking about?" "Don't play dumb," he warned. "I need to know if you said anything to anyone." Her voice sharpened. "You think I'm the one sabotaging you? That's rich, Ethan. Maybe if you weren't so busy ignoring me, you'd realize I'm not your problem." He exhaled, pinching the bridge of his nose. "Then who is?" "Maybe you should ask your ex-wife," Sophia said with a hint of venom. "She's smarter than you give her credit for." The line went dead, leaving Ethan alone with the weight of her words. He knew Sophia was right, but confronting Lily wouldn't be easy. She had always been composed, calculated in the way she handled conflict. If she was behind this, she wouldn't crack easily. He poured himself a glass of scotch and downed it in one gulp, the liquid burning its way down his throat. The thought of Lily orchestrating his downfall made his blood boil. She had played the role of the wronged woman perfectly, but maybe that was her plan all along. Maybe she had been waiting for the right moment to strike. Across town, in her small apartment, Lily sat at the kitchen table, scrolling through her emails. Jason had sent her an update that morning. The forensic accountant found multiple discrepancies in Ethan's records. "We're getting closer." She took a sip of her tea, her fingers trembling slightly. She had expected some resistance, but the fact that Ethan hadn't retaliated yet made her nervous. He wasn't the type to let things slide, especially when his reputation was on the line. Her phone buzzed with a text from Olivia. "I got an A on my math test. Can we celebrate tonight?" Lily smiled, her heart swelling with pride. "Of course. Ice cream after dinner." She set her phone down and leaned back in her chair, allowing herself a brief moment of satisfaction. But the feeling was short-lived. The stakes were too high for her to relax. If Ethan figured out what she was doing before she had enough evidence, he would destroy her. A knock at the door startled her. She wasn't expecting anyone, and the sight of Ethan standing on her doorstep sent a jolt of fear through her. He was still in his suit, but the top button of his shirt was undone, and the look in his eyes was a mix of fury and desperation. "Can we talk?" he asked, his voice low. Lily hesitated before stepping aside to let him in. He paced the small living room, his gaze darting around the modest furniture and half-unpacked boxes. It was a far cry from the mansion they had once shared. "I know what you're doing," Ethan said, turning to face her. "And I want it to stop." Lily crossed her arms, her expression calm. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't play innocent," he snapped. "The offshore accounts, the article, it's all you." She met his gaze, unflinching. "You built your empire on lies, Ethan. Did you really think it would never catch up to you?" His jaw tightened, but he didn't deny it. "What do you want, Lily? Money? Revenge?" "I want justice," she replied. "You took everything from me. My home, my security, my dignity. Now, it's your turn to lose." The tension between them was suffocating, but Lily refused to back down. She had spent years being underestimated by him, and she wasn't about to let him win this time. Ethan took a step closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Be careful, Lily. If you push too hard, you might regret it." She held her ground. "The only thing I regret is not doing this sooner." He stared at her for a moment before turning on his heel and leaving, the door slamming behind him. Lily exhaled, her body trembling with adrenaline. She knew this was only the beginning, but she was ready. No matter what Ethan did next, she wouldn't stop. The kitchen buzzed with the soft hum of the coffee maker as Lily flipped through a stack of invoices. It was another ordinary evening, or at least that's how she wanted it to feel for Olivia and Noah. The dinner plates sat empty on the counter, waiting to be washed, and the rhythmic ticking of the wall clock filled the silence. But her mind was far from ordinary thoughts. It raced with the details of her plan and the knowledge that, at any moment, things could spiral beyond her control. Her phone vibrated next to the pile of papers, the screen lighting up with a message from Jason. The accountant found more. Offshore accounts and fraudulent shell companies. "I'll send the documents soon." Lily exhaled, her fingers brushing over the phone as she read the message twice. Each discovery was a step closer to exposing Ethan, but each step also increased the risk. If she pushed too hard or moved too fast, Ethan could counter her efforts. The warning he'd given her during his unexpected visit still echoed in her mind, but it wasn't fear that filled her now. It was resolve. "Mom?" Olivia's voice pulled her back to the present. Lily looked up to see her daughter standing in the doorway, clutching a notebook to her chest. Olivia's face held the slightest hint of curiosity, her eyes scanning the cluttered table. "Are you working on something important?" "Just bills," Lily replied, forcing a small smile. "What's up, sweetheart?" Olivia hesitated before stepping into the room. "I finished my homework, but I was wondering, can we talk?" "Of course." Lily set her phone aside and gestured for Olivia to sit. "What's on your mind?" Olivia climbed onto the chair opposite her mother, her fingers fidgeting with the edge of the notebook. "It's about Dad." Lily's heart skipped a beat, but she kept her expression neutral. "What about him?" Olivia bit her lip before speaking. "I heard some kids at school talking about him today. They said he's in trouble." Lily's stomach tightened. She hadn't expected news of Ethan's troubles to reach her children so soon, but it made sense. In today's world, gossip spread faster than wildfire. What exactly did they say? They didn't know much, Olivia admitted, lowering her gaze. Just that Dad's company isn't doing well, and that there might be something wrong with the money. Lily leaned forward, resting her hand gently on her daughter's. "Olivia, listen to me. Your dad's problems are complicated, but they have nothing to do with you or Noah. No matter what happens, I'm here to make sure we're okay." Olivia nodded, though the worry in her eyes remained. "Are you still mad at him?" The question hit Lily like a punch to the chest. How could she explain the depth of her anger without burdening her daughter with the pain she'd carried for so long? "I'm not mad, sweetie," she said softly. "I just want to make sure he's held accountable for the things he's done." Olivia tilted her head, her curiosity not quite satisfied. "Like what?" Before Lily could answer, Noah bounded into the room, his energy breaking the tension. "Mom, can I have ice cream now?" he asked, his wide grin making Lily's heart lighten just a little. "After you finish cleaning your room," she said, ruffling his hair as he darted toward the kitchen. As Olivia got up to help her brother, Lily's phone buzzed again, this time with an email notification. She opened it, scanning the documents Jason had just sent. The files were extensive, detailing years of financial manipulation, offshore transactions, fraudulent loans, and forged contracts. The evidence was damning, but it wasn't enough to completely ruin Ethan. Not yet. She needed one final push, and she knew exactly where to find it. Later that night, after the kids had gone to bed, Lily sat on the couch with her laptop resting on her knees. The glow of the screen illuminated her face as she scrolled through old photos and videos stored on her hard drive. Among them were family vacations, birthday parties, and Christmas mornings when Ethan had still been a devoted husband and father, or at least, when he pretended to be. Her fingers hovered over a video titled Family Ski Trip 2015. She clicked play, and the screen came to life with images of Olivia and Noah bundled up in snow gear, their laughter echoing through the speakers. Ethan's voice was in the background, coaching the kids as they slid down the hill. Lily paused the video, her eyes lingering on his face. He had looked so genuine back then, but now she knew it was all a performance. Her gaze shifted to the folder marked Personal Documents, a folder Ethan had never expected her to find. Inside, she found files he had carelessly saved to their shared cloud account years ago. Most of them were mundane, but one document caught her attention: private investment logs. She opened it and scanned the entries, her pulse quickening as she recognized some of the same account numbers from the forensic report. This was the missing piece, the evidence that could connect all the dots. But she needed more than digital proof. She needed something public, something that couldn't be ignored. The next morning, after dropping the kids off at school, Lily met Jason at a small cafe downtown. He sat by the window, nursing a cup of coffee as he reviewed the latest batch of documents. His eyes lit up when he saw her approach. "You've been busy," he said, sliding the papers across the table. "This is good, Lily. Really good." "It's a start," she replied, taking a seat. "But I need your help with the next step." Jason leaned back, studying her with a mixture of admiration and concern. "What exactly do you have in mind?" "I want to leak the information to the press," she said, her voice steady. "But not anonymously this time. I want them to know it's coming from me." Jason's brows furrowed. "That's risky, Lily. Once your name's out there, Ethan will know exactly who to blame." "I'm counting on it," she said. "He needs to understand that I'm not afraid of him anymore." Jason sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Okay, I'll make the arrangements. But you need to be prepared for the fallout." "I am," Lily said confidently. By the time she returned home, the weight on her shoulders felt lighter, but only slightly. She knew the road ahead would be rough, but she also knew she couldn't stop now. That evening, as she prepared dinner, Olivia wandered into the kitchen and placed her phone on the counter. "Mom, look at this," she said, showing her a video. It was a short clip of Ethan at a recent business event, looking tired and disheveled as reporters bombarded him with questions about the company's financial troubles. One of the reporters asked if his family had anything to say about the scandal, and Ethan's response was dismissive. "My family isn't involved in my business affairs." Lily felt a surge of anger, but it was Olivia's next words that stopped her cold. "Do you think we should say something?" Olivia asked, her tone innocent but filled with curiosity. Lily paused, the weight of the question hanging in the air. And for the first time, she realized her daughter wasn't just a bystander in this story. She was ready to help change its outcome. "We'll see, sweetheart," Lily said, pulling Olivia into a hug. "We'll see." The roar of the city outside did little to muffle the chaos inside Ethan Brooks' penthouse. The usually pristine space, with its sleek glass tables and expensive art installations, now felt like a prison. Half-empty whiskey bottles cluttered the counter, and the thick scent of alcohol mixed with the stale air. The curtains were drawn tight, blocking out the light, as if to shield him from the world closing in on him. Ethan sat slumped on the couch, his tie loosened and his shirt wrinkled from a night spent tossing and turning. His eyes, bloodshot and heavy-lidded, were fixed on the television screen. The financial news channel droned on about the latest corporate scandal, but this time, the headline wasn't about someone else's downfall, it was about his. Brooks Enterprises under fire. CEO Ethan Brooks accused of fraud and embezzlement. The scrolling ticker at the bottom of the screen listed key points from the leaked report: offshore accounts, misappropriation of funds, and possible legal repercussions. Each word felt like a nail being driven into his coffin. He had seen other men fall from grace, but he had always believed he was smarter, untouchable. Now, he was the one being dragged through the mud. His phone vibrated on the coffee table, but he didn't reach for it. He already knew what the messages would say. Board members distancing themselves, lawyers warning him of impending investigations, and Sophia, well, she had stopped calling altogether. He hadn't seen her in days, and he doubted she would come back. She had latched onto him when he was at the top, but now that he was crumbling, she would find someone else to prop her up. The sound of the front door opening startled him. He sat up, his pulse quickening, but it wasn't Sophia. It was Mark, his CFO, and the only person who still had the nerve to face him directly. Mark's expression was grim, and he didn't bother with pleasantries as he walked into the room and dropped a thick envelope onto the table. "What's this?" Ethan asked, his voice hoarse from lack of sleep. "Your resignation papers," Mark replied. "The board's making it official. They're pushing you out." Ethan's jaw clenched. "They can't do that." "They can, and they have," Mark said, crossing his arms. "You're too much of a liability now. The shareholders are demanding it." Ethan stood, pacing the length of the room as anger boiled under his skin. "I built this company from the ground up. I made them rich, and now they're throwing me out like garbage." "You did build it," Mark admitted, "but you also tore it down. The offshore accounts, the fake investments, it's all catching up to you." Ethan stopped pacing and turned to face him. "You think I'm the only CEO who's ever hidden money offshore? They all do it, Mark. I just got caught." "Maybe," Mark said, shrugging, "but you're the one on the front page now." Silence hung between them, thick and suffocating. Ethan's mind raced, grasping for a way out, but every door seemed to be closing in on him. "There's got to be a way to fix this." Mark shook his head. "It's too late. The damage is done." Ethan sank back onto the couch, his head in his hands. For years, he had been the man with all the answers, the one people turned to when things went wrong. But now, he had nothing. His empire was crumbling, and there was no one left to save him. "I'll give you some time to think," Mark said, heading toward the door. "But if I were you, I'd get a good lawyer. You're going to need one." After Mark left, the silence in the penthouse was deafening. Ethan stared at the resignation papers, the weight of his failure pressing down on him like a lead blanket. He had always thought that if he ever hit rock bottom, he would know how to climb back up. But now that he was here, he couldn't see a way forward. The only thing he could think of was Lily. The cab ride to Lily's apartment was a blur. Ethan barely noticed the city rushing past the window as he sat in the back seat, his mind spinning with thoughts of her. He hadn't seen her since their confrontation, but he knew she was the one behind the leaks. It had to be her. No one else had the motive or the knowledge to hit him where it hurt. When the cab pulled up outside her building, he hesitated for a moment before stepping out. The cold night air bit at his skin as he made his way up the stairs and knocked on her door. The sound echoed through the hallway, and for a moment, he thought she wouldn't answer. But then the door opened, and there she was, Lily, standing in the doorway with a mixture of surprise and caution in her eyes. "Ethan," she said, her voice steady. "What are you doing here?" "I need to talk," he replied, his voice barely above a whisper. Lily studied him for a moment before stepping aside and letting him in. The apartment was small and cozy, a stark contrast to the cold luxury of his penthouse. The smell of freshly brewed tea filled the air, and a stack of children's books sat on the coffee table. "Have a seat," she said, closing the door behind him. He sat on the worn couch, his shoulders slumped. Lily sat across from him, her posture straight and composed. "What do you want, Ethan?" He ran a hand through his hair, exhaling sharply. "I know it was you." She didn't flinch. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't lie to me, Lily," he said, his voice rising. "You leaked the documents. You destroyed my career." Lily met his gaze, her expression calm. "You destroyed your career, Ethan. I just made sure the world knew about it." Her words hit him like a punch to the gut, but he couldn't argue with them. He had made the decisions that led to this moment, but that didn't make the betrayal any easier to swallow. "Why, Lily? Was this your plan all along?" She shook her head. "I didn't plan this, Ethan, but after everything you did, leaving me with nothing, humiliating me, I had to fight back." His eyes softened, and for the first time in years, he allowed himself to be vulnerable. "I didn't think you had it in you." "You never did," she replied. "That was your mistake." The silence that followed was heavy, filled with unspoken regrets and shattered memories. Ethan leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. "I don't know what to do, Lily. I've lost everything." Her gaze softened, but there was no pity in her eyes. "You're not the first person to lose everything, Ethan. I did too. The difference is, I had to learn how to rebuild from nothing." He nodded slowly, her words sinking in. "Is there any part of you that still cares about me?" Lily hesitated, her fingers tightening around the mug of tea in her hands. "I cared about the man you used to be, but that man is gone." The weight of her words settled over him like a final verdict. He had come here searching for forgiveness, for some shred of hope that he could undo the damage, but Lily had already moved on. And now, he had to do the same. As he stood to leave, he paused at the door and turned back to her. "I'm sorry, Lily, for everything." She nodded, but she didn't say the words he was hoping to hear. He left the apartment, the sound of the door closing behind him marking the end of one chapter and the beginning of another, one he would have to face alone. The cafe was unusually quiet for a weekday afternoon. The hum of the espresso machine blended with the soft clinking of spoons against ceramic cups, and the faint aroma of roasted coffee beans filled the air. Lily Harper sat at a table near the window, her fingers loosely wrapped around a cup of tea that had long since cooled. She wasn't here for the tea. She was here for closure. Outside, the street buzzed with life. Commuters hurrying past, a street musician strumming a slow melody on his guitar, and the occasional laugh of a passerby. But inside, the world seemed to hold its breath. The door to the cafe swung open, and there he was, Ethan Brooks. He looked different than the last time she'd seen him. The confidence he once wore like armor had cracked. His suit, though expensive, seemed to hang looser on him, as though he'd lost weight. Dark circles framed his eyes, and his normally perfect posture sagged under the weight of something heavier than exhaustion. He spotted her immediately, hesitating for only a second before making his way to her table. When he sat down across from her, the air between them was charged with years of unresolved pain, regret, and unfinished conversations. "Thanks for meeting me," Ethan said, his voice subdued. Lily nodded but didn't offer a smile. "I wasn't sure if I would." "I'm glad you did." He leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on the table. His fingers drummed against each other, a nervous habit she hadn't seen in years. "I wanted to talk to you, properly this time. No accusations, no anger. Just talk." She sipped her tea, considering his words. "Then talk." He took a deep breath, as if gathering courage. "I've lost everything, Lily. The company, my reputation, the money. It's all gone. The board forced me out, the media won't leave me alone, and the SEC is investigating me. I'm probably looking at criminal charges." Lily remained silent, her eyes studying him, but there was no satisfaction in her gaze. She had thought that seeing him like this, broken, humbled, would bring her peace, but it didn't. It only made her realize how much they had both lost. "I know you're behind the leaks," he continued, "and I know why you did it. I don't blame you. That admission surprised her. She had expected him to be angry, to accuse her of ruining him. But instead, he looked defeated. You don't blame me? She asked, raising an eyebrow. Why not? Because I deserved it, he said, his voice cracking slightly. I did terrible things, Lily. To you, to the company, to myself. I lied. I cheated. And I built everything on a foundation that was bound to collapse eventually. You just sped up the process. She leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms over her chest. Why are you telling me this now? What do you want from me, Ethan? He looked down at his hands, as if ashamed. I want to make things right. Lily laughed, but there was no humor in it. Make things right? You think an apology will fix everything? You think you can undo the years of damage with a few words? I know I can't, he said quickly, but I have to try. For once, I have to do the right thing. Her eyes softened, but only slightly. You had years to do the right thing, Ethan, but you chose yourself every time. He nodded, accepting her words like blows he knew he deserved. I know, and I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry. The silence that followed was deafening. Outside, the world continued without them, but inside, they were trapped in a moment that felt both endless and fleeting. I loved you, Lily said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. I gave you everything I had, my trust, my heart, my support, and you threw it all away. Ethan's throat tightened, and he struggled to find the right words. I loved you too, Lily. I still do. But I didn't know how to handle success without losing myself. Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them away. You didn't lose yourself, Ethan. You chose to be someone else. He reached across the table, his hand hovering over hers. Please, let me help you now. I can sell off what's left of the assets and make sure you and the kids are taken care of. She pulled her hand away, her expression firm. We're already taken care of. I've been doing it without you. He sat back, defeated. I don't know how to move forward. You don't need me to figure that out, Lily said. You need to figure it out for yourself. Ethan swallowed hard, his gaze dropping to the table. What about the kids? Do they hate me? No, she replied softly. But they don't understand what you've done either. They miss the version of you who cared about them. I miss that version too, he whispered. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of their shared history pressing down on them. Ethan finally stood, pushing his chair back. I should go. Thank you for listening. Lily watched him gather his coat and head for the door. As his hand reached for the handle, she called out to him. Ethan. He turned, hope flickering in his eyes. Do better, she said. Not for me, but for yourself. And if you ever want to be part of Olivia and Noah's lives again, you'll need to prove that you've changed. He nodded, his throat too tight to speak. With one final glance, he walked out of the cafe and into the cold afternoon air. The door swung shut behind him, and Lily felt the weight on her chest lift, just slightly, but enough to breathe easier. As she finished her tea, her phone buzzed with a message from Jason. The last of the evidence is with the authorities. They'll take it from here. She exhaled, a sense of finality settling over her. This chapter of her life was closing, but it wasn't an ending. It was the beginning of something new, something she had built with her own strength. Lily stood, gathering her things and heading for the door. Outside, the air was crisp, and the sun had begun to break through the clouds. As she walked down the street, she thought of Olivia and Noah waiting for her at home, their laughter the sound of everything she had fought for. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she wasn't afraid of it.